Our presenter for this session is Jay Fuhrer, Soil Health Specialist with NRCS in North Dakota. Jay is one of the best-known soil specialists in North America and has assisted hundreds of growers across the country and the world to improve their soils. Growing up on a small grain and livestock farm, Jay's interests have always been centered on agriculture. Jay emphasizes soil health as a foundation for cropping systems, grazing systems, cover crops, soil biology, pollinators, insects, wildlife, and the quality of life. In addition, Jay uses cover crops and livestock integration to connect the cropping and grazing systems together, raising the soil health bar even higher. The title of Jay's presentation is Rebuilding and Maintaining Life in the Soil, a case study review. Please welcome Jay.
Thank you, Abby. Didn't she do a nice job?
Yes.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. All right. We're going to talk about a couple of case studies in some discussion with Steve Swaffer. We kind of came to an agreement that let's do one on cropland and one on livestock grazing, basically. Okay, so we'll kind of switch them up a little bit. This first one that we're going to talk about is one that I've been working with for about 5 years. So it's about a 5-year client. The second one we're going to talk a little bit about I've worked with for 35 years. So there's a little difference on the amount of time, but we're going to walk through these a bit and we'll kind of see where we're at. This particular one here is located in the North Dakota Coteau region. The Coteau is kind of where the glacier got hung up and couldn't go forward and backward, just kind of had to sit there. So it's kind of the edge of the drift plain in the Coteau. But let's go ahead and talk about it a bit. And it's one that's on, it's a cash grain producer. And I want to kind of acclimate you a little bit to the resource concerns. If you've read David Montgomery's book, Dirt, the Erosion of Civilization, let me know. Have you read that? Okay, great. What brought down a lot of those civilizations that were talked about? What brought them down? Lost their topsoil. Okay, so if you read the book, it's like wind erosion, water erosion, salinity. Okay? What do you think I got on this farm? Wind erosion, water erosion, salinity, and a lot of salinity, okay? And we have real salinity issues in the northern plains because basically we're looking at, over time, we've managed our water with tillage and evaporation. And when you do that, the first 50 years you do that, it's probably not a big deal. The second 50 years you do that, it starts to really hurt. And the last 20 years you do it, it can bring you right out of business. So we're going to take a look at that, and we want to rebuild and restore. If you have a question, just holler it out, and we can stop and talk about it. That's what we would do in North Dakota. So that's what we'll do. If you have a question, we'll say, just say, and if I don't know the answer, I'm going to say something creative to you like, I don't know. All right? That's what we're going to do. So this is Fletcher Farms, and he plants green now. And he has this quote, when you are transitioning to no-till and cover crops, you have the worst of both worlds. Why? You no longer have the tillage benefits. And you haven't really built all the no-till benefits yet fully. So you're sitting there in the middle. Why do we till as a society? Why have we always tilled? It's maximum release of nutrient, right? Maximum release of nutrient. Mineralizes like crazy, okay? As long as you got something to mineralize, right? So when you no longer have something to mineralize, that gets really serious. Okay, so that's his quote, and I think it's a good quote. And it really describes acclimation periods when you start to change. When you make a change, you're most at risk. Because previously, your soil biology knew what to expect from you. And it would bump along. It knows what to expect. Well, then one day you quit tilling. It has to adjust. Then one day you added cover crops. It has to adjust. Okay, that's this period that we're going to talk about here, this adjustment period. So, Courtney, North Dakota, northeast of Jamestown, North Dakota, if you know where Jamestown is, or should we say northwest of Fargo if you want to, somewhere's in the middle. Crop rotation is soybeans, pinto beans, malting barley, and corn, and looking at adding alfalfa. This is a cash grain. This is a cash grain example. There's no livestock in this example. The next one will have, okay? Years of no-till is now 5. Years of cover crop is 4. The only livestock he has is the below ground herd, okay? So we all know where we're at. All right. Resource concerns, guess what? Salinity, wind erosion, low carbon cash crops. If we keep growing low carbon cash crops consecutive years, it starts to collapse our soils because we don't have enough carbon to feed the biology to build the soil aggregates back to improve our infiltration. Because soil aggregates, you have to build and rebuild, build and rebuild. It's not one and done. You have to continually build soil aggregates. You'll never finish with that. That's always ongoing. Nutrient management. If we get far enough into the system, then we start taking a more serious look at nutrient management, because then there's usually some benefits to be had. And he's getting to that point now, starting to tweak the nutrient management. And then just economics. And with that, I want to relate it to his yield. Okay? So if you're familiar with pintos, they're part of the dry edible. So I threw that on there so everybody understands what a pinto bean is. You think soybeans don't grow much for carbon, for biomass. Pintos are probably worse. Okay? Not a whole lot of material there. All right? They're not evil, but we got to recognize they don't have much carbon, so we have to offset and supplement them with a cover crop that has carbon. Does that make sense? So we get enough carbon into the soil to feed the biology. Okay. Then I took 2 years of data. This is Stutsman County. This is where Courtney, North Dakota is. It's in Stutsman County. 2016, 2017, the average yield was 1895. Okay? And they sold for $27.40 a hundredweight. So now you got an idea what a pinto bean is. All right? So it kind of gives you a little understanding. All right. Now, this is just one example of a cover crop that was put together, just one example. Keep in mind, we want something to plant green into in the spring, meaning I need a biennial. So the rye becomes the biennial. It's also a higher carbon crop, so it starts to offset our carbon losses. We augmented it with some turnip, radish, crimson clover, common vetch. If I put them in early enough in the fall, then we want to have some additional species. If it got in really late, worst case scenario, I can seed rye the same day it freezes up and snows. It won't come up, but it will in the spring. But it's slower then. I've slowed it up then. So I always like it in a little earlier if I can. Okay, I got to take a look at my water use. Okay, that's 16, almost 17 inches of water. Okay, I can go on to my my ag network in North Dakota, and I can find water use of any crop. Okay, I know I got a 4-foot profile that'll hold 8 to 9 inches. These mollisol soils will hold 8 to 9 inches of water. I also know I have salinity, which means I have too much water, ultimately salt. I'm leaving the salt behind. So am I real worried about running out of water? I'm not real worried about it in this example. I got to balance it because I don't want to take a big butt kicking on yield in the right year, so I want to balance it, right? Okay. But the mere fact that I have salinity says I'm not flushing these salts. Okay? So that gives me a clue right away. That's what the salinity looks like. Beautiful. It's beautiful stuff. As you are driving your combine, when you get into anywhere remotely close to one, the yield will go down. The yield doesn't go down when you hit the white spot. The yield goes down way before that. And then as you get closer, it just goes further down, further down, further down until you zero out in the white spot. But I need to know what these levels are, and I need to know that on the upground I'm around 3.9. And on the salinity area, I'm about 6.7 on these millimos, so I got an idea now. I also know that there's a huge supply of fertilizer, so much so it's toxic. I got so much nitrogen and phosphorus in those that it's just unbelievable. Because over the last 50 years, we fertilized through them all. sprayed through them all, seeded through them all, combined through them all, windrowed through them all. Okay? Because otherwise you're turning around, so everybody just kind of has a tendency to keep going straight lines. Makes sense? Yeah. But in that soil, really high nutrient, real high fertilizer content, to the point of being toxic. You think it needs to be addressed? Absolutely. These soils were underwater geologically, so these are geological salts. They're not going anywheres. Back in the day when it was all perennials, you would have never seen them. You'd have never known they were there. But when you don't have perennials in it anymore, you can't take the deep water out. And when I only have a cash crop on there drawing water for 2 or 3 months, how much water can I take out? How deep rooted is a soybean plant? It isn't. How deep rooted is a pinto plant? It isn't. You can see the issue. So we got to bring something in, transpire water, not evaporate it. We got to transpire it. So then I look at a chart like this. I know what the levels are now. And so I look on here and I find rye. Well, rye is 4.5. Okay, 4.5. Let's do this. Oh, wrong way. Let's do this. 4.5. Now you see why the rye is growing here. It'll tolerate that, right? And so it'll tolerate the upper reaches, which is at 3.9. So the rye being strong enough, it'll tolerate this area right in here. Okay? So I start to draw that water down. So then I look on the chart and I look at soybean. Soybean's 2/3 of the way down. It'll tolerate 2.4. Little sensitive. What's a pinto bean? 1.1. Does it like salt? No. So we got to change this environment, right? So we got to draw the water down. We have to transpire it, not evaporate it. Evaporating is going to kill us. If we keep evaporating, we're going to end up in David Montgomery's book. Do you want to end up in his book? No. Especially not that first one. It's depressing. Okay. So we made one easy change. This was the easy change. Let's put the barley on the saltier ground, put the beans on the non-salty ground. Okay, that's a start. That's just a start. Okay? Then we start looking at how do we bring in a cover crop. So cover crops need to transpire water. When you transpire water, you buy something. You understand? You got plant function then. What did Ann talk about? She talked about exudates of carbon into the soil. That green plant will put the exudates of carbon into the soil. Have you tasted these? Have you all tasted the exudates? Next summer, you dig up a corn plant, if you can find one. That was kind of a joke, but it's all right. So you find this corn plant, and you dig it up, and do it before it tassels. You know, do it when it's in the earlier stages. Nip off the ends of the root tips. Clean them off if you want to. Taste them. Chew them up. What are they going to taste like? Purest sugar taste you've ever tasted. It will stick in your mind. You won't have to have somebody talk to you about exudates. It will be there forever. You will have it because it's so pure, such a pure taste. Okay? So we're going to and when you're transpiring water, those things occur. You're bringing carbon into the soil. Now you're building aggregates. Okay? Makes sense? Versus bare soils tillage, which evaporates water and it costs you something. You're not building anything. You're only losing carbon. Okay, so one costs us, one buys us something. So transpiration in lieu of evaporation, transpiration equals life in the soil. Okay, so when we have transpiration, we're going to have something good happen in the soil. We're going to start to address resource concern of salinity. Now erosion is another one. When we have, this is on the landscape next to Dana, when we have this occurring, this was a wheat field, when we have this occurring and you see the sediment here in the ditch, that's the minor part. What happened to the major part? Clay colloids are what this phosphorus is locked on. So when you have wind erosion and the clay colloids are microscopic, they leave before you see any of this. They're gone, airborne, heading to South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa. Yeah, they're leaving. They're microscopic. They will go a long, long ways. That's the most nutrient-rich part. That's the part that's gone. This is the part that just reminds you of something that happened. Okay, that's bad also, but the most nutrient-rich parts left earlier. Okay, so we start to realize the magnitude of it. We can't tolerate soil erosion if we're going to build soils. There is no level of tolerance. It just has to be 0. Okay? So, this is Dana's fields now. Do you see any wind erosion? No. He's got armor. It's a higher carbon material. It's going to offset those pinto beans and soybeans that he's going to put on there and help balance out this carbon scenario. So if we look at this chart alone, look at a rye cover crop, depending on when you terminate it, be at least 37 to 1. If it gets really more mature, it'll go up to 82 if it gets to full maturity. Okay? What's a soybean? Probably around 29 to 1 roughly, give or take a little. That's really close. Pintos are no more than that, maybe less. What's the C/N ratio of the soil that everything has to decompose down to? It's going to be about 10 to 1. 10 to 1 or 11 to 1. Right in there is all the data you're going to find on it. Why? Because in 1% soil organic matter, there's 10,000 units of carbon and 1,000 units of organic N on every 1%. So you do the math to reduce that down, you get 10 to 1. Right? So that's what the soil is. So when we have too much pinto or soybean on there, they're not evil, but you keep growing them consecutively with no cover crop, you are really running a really low carbon environment. You are going to collapse a lot of soils. Okay? So if we also take a look at this, I like to have my organic N higher than my inorganic N. My organic N, that's what's going to mineralize out. That's stable. Okay? I don't like all that much inorganic available at one time, okay, because that's plant available. If I don't use it, it's going to go somewheres. So I get real frugal with it. That's why I really like bringing in the cover crops, because as it decays, it releases, okay? And for these low carbon legumes like pinto and soybean, now we're setting up an ideal situation for them, okay? So cover crops provide the catch and release. Jeremy Wilson is a farmer not too far from here. He kind of coined that phrase in North Dakota, catch and release of cover crop for nutrient. Makes a lot of sense, right? Get it in the plant, it's secure, let it decompose down and release again the following year. Then we just reuse it. I mean, there's a reason all that German heritage is in the Dakotas, right? Because we just don't let go of anything. We're just going to reuse it. All right. Earthworms under the residue. So when you pull this back, they got a nice microclimate under there for the surface dwellers, earthworms included. Okay. So we look at the budgets. Malting barley and corn grain, we look at the possible returns at the beginning of 18, and they're both negatives for malting and corn. Okay, nothing new there. Then we look at soybeans and dry beans, we got small positives. So what that tells me, we don't have much to work with. Right? We don't have a lot to work with. All right? So it also tells me about this average up here. This is projected on 1610. So that's projected at 1610. So keep that figure in mind. Okay? Got to start with some kind of projection, and that's what these sheets were built on. 1610 for yield. So then we looked at it this way over these 4 years. We got to buy seed and we got to seed it. Those are expenses. Got to buy seed, got to seed it. Okay? The termination and the pre-plant offset each other because he no longer does the pre-plant. Just went to termination of the cover. Okay, so they kind of offset each other. So these next two here, I just kind of traded one for the other. The resource concerns, wind erosion, salinity, etc. We got a much more stable environment now. We're starting to get a bit positive there. So I put positives in those. The learning activities. This guy goes to every meeting, every soil health meeting. And he's there, and he tries to have conversations, and he's come a long ways on this whole thing. I got to give him a lot of credit because he's on an iPad at night watching these speakers as much as I am. I have no life, so I'll watch a speaker on an iPad on YouTube, and I'll fall asleep, and I'll wake up, and I'll finish it. You know how the game works. If you have no life, this is really good stuff. And then his learning, so that's his learning activity. Now he also does more scouting than he used to. Now he's walking with a spade, digging up his fields. Okay? That's like the old IPM days. Remember the old IPM days, integrated pest management? We walked the field, looked at a threshold level, then we made a decision whether we should do anything or not. That was a good day. Those were good days. So then we also look at fuel and labor. Those were positives. So at the end of the day, this is starting to offset itself. Now, let's look at his yields during this 4-year period, and these are actual yields on pinto beans, okay? Remember this, the budget sheet was set up on 1610, right, for yield. Okay, so it kind of gives you an idea. And that area averaged 1895, remember that? Okay, so here we go. First year and second year, I'd say you did okay, yield-wise. 2017 was a drought in North Dakota. It was D3 and on. So he held his own a bit. Didn't do just too bad in 17, but it definitely was an impact. And now 18 comes along, and we're getting up here right around 2,800. So 2,800 is significantly more than the 1610 of the extension spreadsheet that we're using for budget. And so we're starting to feel like we are maintaining or building on the yield. That's the critical point when you make these changes, because everything's adjusting, everything's correcting. The biology has to adjust to the new concept, okay? So we felt pretty good about that, and you have to get multiple years of this. 1 or 2 years of this isn't enough, but if you start to get 4 years, more is better. I like 5 or 6, way better. But if you get enough years, then you can start to paint the picture, okay? So with the salinity, evaporation now has been replaced by transpiration, okay? Positive thing. Wind erosion, we got that armor in place. So we have armor now. These were always historically bare soils, forever. Low carbon, high carbon. We now have a higher carbon cover crop to offset the low carbon cash crop. Okay, brings our carbon levels up in the soil. Nutrient management has now gone more to catch and release. This past year was his first year of adjusting some nutrient. I think there's a gain to be had here that he's stepping into now that I wouldn't want to step into at the beginning. But once you get a few years behind you and you can kind of see where you're at, then I think we can start to do some of that. The economics we've actually maintained to improved yields. If I can maintain the yields through the transition period, I feel good about that. It's not an easy thing to do because of why? Because of his quote. Remember his quote? I'm no longer getting the benefits of the tillage, too early to get the benefits of the no-till. What's the benefits of the tillage? Maximum nutrient release, just right out of this world, right? Yeah. Short-term economics. No tomorrow. No tomorrow. Okay? Restoring the landscape. That was case study number 1. Questions? Yes, sir.
Quick. The type of salts that you're counting, are they bicarbonate-based salts? Carbonate?
I think there's probably going to be some of each, but probably more of the first.
Have the saline areas reduced in size before you?
The main area, not as much as the upland areas that were around 3.9 to 4. That's where we get our first benefit. Now he's got the alfalfa in reserve. We're going to bring the alfalfa in to bring water levels down a bit more yet. Because I feel in those areas, if his neighbors all started to put in the cover crops, we could do this quicker. Because then you get the big area. When the central part of North Dakota moved into the no-till systems, our humidity went up. Sounds strange, but it was such a big area went in at the same time. You can't do that on one farm or one field. You got to have a big area, okay? Then it starts to make those impacts. So if the neighbors brought in the cover crops, we could address the salinity sooner. Yeah. Other questions? Comments? It's that initial few years. Now he's doing 2 things at once. When we went into the no-till systems in the 90s, we didn't go in with covers. Didn't even know what a cover crop was. We went into the no-till systems. Later, we moved into the cover crops, so we did it in 2 stages. He's doing it all at the same time. He has to watch more YouTube videos at night to do them both at the same time. Okay? Great person to work with. Wonderful. It's an honor. You know, it's an honor to be able to tag along on that. You know, I'm learning way more than he is.
Does this apply in the same fashion when you have a sodic soil?
Sodic would be different. Yeah, you're going to have the biscuits and you got sodicity. I'd sooner deal with salinity myself. What do you think? Yeah, salinity, you got a bit of a hope. Sodicity is more of, yeah, that never should have been taken out. Yeah, sodicity is a little tougher. Yep. Okay, in the sake of time, we're going to move into the second one. Try to get through. I think I brought along 20, but we'll try to get through 2. That's the goal. Okay. All right. McPeak Ranch, rebuilding, maintaining life in the soil again. Now, this is a livestock operation. No cropland. We're going to flip it completely. No cropland. Were you on McPeak Ranch? Have we ever had you there? Okay. Yeah. Well, usually Missouri people, we don't always bring them up there, you know. Too much. Show me. Yeah, too much. Okay. Now you're in the prairie pothole region. Lots of wetlands. It's where the glacier got stuck. And that Coteau part, normally a glacier goes forward, backward, forward, backward. There, it just got on the upper reaches and it stopped. And then all that soil that was caught up in the ice, as it melted there over geological time, that soil came down, and underneath the soil, when it got to the bottom, there was still some ice, right? Because it's so insulated. And it would slide off that ice and would form this ring. What do you think that ring became? It became a wetland. Yeah, became a pothole. There you are. Okay, so he's hiding in the hay here, but what this is about is moving from traditional hayland management, which means that you would windrow it, bale it, and remove the hay. What would you do with the next cutting? You would windrow it, bale it, remove the hay. What would you do next year? You would windrow it, bale it, remove the hay. So in other words, we're exporting all the carbon off, right? Yeah. And so they came into the office one day, the entire clan, you know, there's like 3-4 of them. And they came in the office and they said, why is it that we're in the 3rd year of a drought in our grazing system, we haven't had to reduce 1 cow, but our hayland, we've been buying hay? So I gave them the USDA answer, so take a note here. I said, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. Okay? So I went on a mission and started going down that rabbit hole because I had a learning curve in front of me. This was a lot of years ago, and honestly, I couldn't answer them. I would have if I could have. So I started digging in, talking to people a lot smarter than me, and started to understand the whole cycle in terms of the grasslands, which everything that goes in the front end of that cow, 90% plus comes out the back, including the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, potassium, the calcium, etc. I needed to replicate that system. So I said, let's feed the hay on the hayland. And to my surprise, they looked at me and said, okay, let's go do it. So we did. So we set up a number of these. That became the windbreak. Okay. Fed a different location every day. They rolled the hay out. This isn't bale grazing. They do some of that too. This isn't bale grazing. This is rolling out the hay. So it impacts a much larger area. Okay. Their goal was to get back, if it's an 80-acre field, they try to get back over the full 80. If they don't, they finish it out the next year. But you keep spreading out across the same acres it came from. Okay. So there's 4 of them in a row. There's 4 hayland fields in a row. They're each being fed in a different location every day. All right. And since there's no electricity out on these water tanks that run on a pressurized pipeline, sometimes you got to get innovative, and they'll bring a tractor over to it and run the exhaust in on a frozen pipe. They're very good at what they do. You know, they figure it out. That's pretty clever. So winter feeding on hayland, that's what this started. Okay. Also, they had moved their calving date earlier, so they had moved their calving date more into early summer. And 25 years ago, that was a $76,000 savings, 25 years ago. So I ran the math on 2018. So that $76,000 25 years ago is $133,000 now. So you can see was there a, you know, in terms of economics, big impact in setting themselves up to process this. Okay, Now let's look at some of the monitoring data. This is the bale count. So in 2011, that was our start. In 2011, the bale count was 155 bales on that 75-acre field. Okay, so one cut system. All right. So now we got 155 bales, and now we're going to start winter feeding. So you can see what happened in 12. The bale count went up. What happened in 13? The bale count went up to 218. And then you can see in 14 and 15 and 16, bale counts are pretty strong, well above the 155 that was in 2011. 2017 was our drought. Remember, Dana Fletcher had it in my first example. You had the drought, 2017. There's the drought on this ranch. Okay, still had 146 bales. Okay, still had pretty good bale count. This 2011 year right here was not a drought year. That's just low vigor. That's just low plant vigor. Okay, so when we started. And now 2018, our most current year, we're sitting right here at 220, so that averages 225. So we've gone from 155 previous when we started, 155, and now we got an average over that monitoring period of 225. That's by changing management. We didn't buy anything. Never bought anything. Changed management. That's a lot harder than buying something. Buying something's easier. Changing up here is harder for us. Okay? So then we go to look at winter grazing. Now these are days that he grazes it. When he brings them off of the main grazing system, they go through these pastures for a few days, each one of them. All right? And then again in the spring, when it's green, he goes through them again, picks up a few days of grazing. Look at our drought year in 2017. Picked up a lot of grazing days. Paid a big dividend. Had a place to go. He had forage material for him to consume. Okay? So grazing days was something that was never on these fields ever. Now there's livestock on them all winter long, and in the fall a bit, in the spring a bit. Okay? So then if we look at biology, what's the soil food web doing? When we started, the soil food web was around 1671 in 2014. That's a pretty small amount, pretty small number in our environment. 2,500 to 3,000 is a lot of my cropland fields for the soil food web on the biology, on the weight. Well, you can see in the second year, in 2014, it started to gain some traction. And then the following years in 15, 16, 17, and 18, it gained quite a bit more. And then I'm starting to wonder, well, what is a good number? What is a high number on the weight of the soil food web? I have no idea. All I can tell you, this far exceeds any of my cropland fields. It far exceeds those. Okay? So that's the biology and what happened with the biology. Now, if you look at, even if you look at 2017, the drought year, still was far in excess of before we started feeding on it. So it kind of gives you some idea there. Okay, then if we look at soil organic matter, this is just standard soil test, soil organic matter. We started out at about 3%. And we've been climbing since. But we're adding carbon. What do you need? You need carbon and nitrogen, right? Now we're cycling, we're recycling. So now you start thinking about the soil health principles. When you got residue on the surface, you got a continuous plant, you got livestock integration, you got all these on the ground. So now I'm starting to wonder, well, what is a good soil organic matter level for our area? Because that's far in excess of anything else I have. It's far in excess of my cropland fields at the Minokan farm. So now I'm thinking, okay, this is pretty significant. When I do infiltration on this, an inch of water, we're talking 15 seconds for an inch of water. If we put the second inch in, we're talking 18 seconds. Now you're building a lot of soil aggregates. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, then we look at the protein and the energy. So here we go. What's in yellow are the fields that are fed on. So what's in yellow? So we got the highest protein, highest crude protein, because the other fields are not fed on. They're owned by somebody else. Okay. And then we got the energy. And you start looking at that, and that's higher than any other place. Do you understand now why I purchased grass-finished beef off of this ranch for my own family? Have for many years. Okay, I'm actually 120 years old, so that was just a joke, but I do it because I know they're on nutrient-dense food. And I have a good protein source then. Okay? Does that make sense? Then if we look at the grazing system part, we're just going to walk through that quickly. That part was started 25 years earlier. 15 pasture system. I like to set up a system that works for your labor, your amount of labor, and your interest. If you want to move cattle every day, great, let's set it up like that. If you got interest and time to do it every 3 days, let's set that up. You know, set up something that will have sustainability long term, that will work for you. This works for them. They get 80 to 90 recovery days. They got a 15 pasture system. They do some of them once over, some of them twice over, and balance it out the next year. Okay, flip it the next year. Season of use changes. The exposure periods are 2 to 3 weeks. That works in their environment, their labor, all of that. So they're moving cattle, one of those pastures, every 2 to 3 weeks. Okay. And then livestock stress management. They've taught me a lot about stress in livestock. And in that upper left-hand corner, I get in the pickup with Todd and we drive up to look at the bred heifers. And he said, you stay in the pickup and I'm going to get out. And he said, and then you tell me what you see when I get back in the pickup. So he gets out of the pickup and that behemoth there he's standing next to lumbers out of there. And that's a steer that's north of 3,000 pounds. And he scratches the back of that steer, you know. And all of the bred heifers form a kind of a horseshoe around him and they all watch this. And he doesn't pay any attention to those bred heifers at all. Never even looks at them. Then he gets back in the pickup and he says, what do you think? And I said, I think you just sent a message to those bred heifers that they can trust you. Yeah, he said, absolutely. He said, stress in livestock costs me money. And he said, they're healthier if they don't have that stress and they trust me. And so I think those are things we used to do more of than we presently do. But it was a good learning environment. So we did the hayland management summary. We're now recycling the nutrients. So instead of exporting carbon, we're recycling carbon. Okay, big difference. Calving dates had to be changed to make this work a bit. The bale count did what? It went up. Okay. The grazing days, we never had them before. Now we have some. Okay, so we got a bit of a backup plan, drought management plan. We got PLFA and soil organic matter. They went up together. Okay, bring carbon levels up, biology comes up. The forage analysis was what? More nutrient dense, right? Meaning Jay's going to buy there. Yeah. Okay.
Is he still feeding out on the grass now?
He feeds on the hayland each winter. Yes, sir. So like right now today. And they're fully protected. They got the windbreak and they got everything they need. And it's like he explained to me, they're just as warm there by that windbreak as they would be at the yard. Yep. Got to have protection in our neck of the woods. You got to have wind protection. Those are some recommended books. When you're done with those, you email me and I'll send you the second list. Okay? And don't chuckle because I got people that do that. They ask for the second list. And so these are just, you know, assuming you have absolutely no life, you'll probably read them all. If you have some life, it'll probably take you quite a while to get through those. But I've read them all. They're all good. They all help explain different concepts and things that occur. So, how are we doing on time?
3:25.
Okay, and we need to be 5 minutes? We got 5 minutes left?
You got 5 minutes left.
Okay, let's just open it up for this last one for any questions. We got 5 minutes left, so we're right on schedule. Oh, it ends at 3:45.
Yeah, you have 5 minutes to talk about your spill.
So,
Your topic, you have 5 minutes to talk about your spill.
okay,
Ends at 3:45.
okay. Okay, that's what I needed, because this thing said 5 minutes left. I should have looked down here. It's 3:25. Yeah, okay. Okay, let's open it up for, I'm with you, finally. Just didn't look like it, right? Okay, questions on either case study?
Just do the basic explanation of the difference between transpiration, evaporation, and fly that.
Okay, The question is evaporation versus transpiration. Okay, so for years in the Dakotas it's a bit cold and wet, especially in the east half of the state. Okay, the cold is throughout, but the wet portion is more the east half of the state. Okay, and in order to manage that water over time, we have, since settlement, we have traditionally tilled those acres to manage that water. Okay, so that means we're evaporating out that water. We got black soils, we get some sunshine. You know, the first 50 years that went gangbusters, no problems at all. Okay, the last 60 years not so much, because then every time you have water leaving through evaporation, there's something stays behind microscopically on the soil surface. So what would that be? Those salts, right? Small amount, small amount. What could it hurt? Right? What could that hurt? And because it's over time, it starts to accumulate. And when we took the perennials off, the perennials used to take out the deep water. There was no issue with the salts because they would continually flush. They would go down. No issue. Now, when we took the perennials off, we replaced it with annuals, right? But we still had some livestock. We still had some hayland fields. We had some of those type things. Kind of went along. Then one day, those went off of the landscape also. So we took the last of the livestock off, took the hayland perennials out, took the fence lines out, took the tree rows out, took the abandoned farmsteads out. That's landscape simplification. There's a price to pay for that. And in our environment, we manage the water and the nutrient release with tillage. And now we have a lot of salinity. And we've lost a lot of nutrient just from wind and water erosion. Now, when we transpire out water, that same water goes through a plant. Do we have salts on the surface? No. We're harvesting water out of the profile. More water can come in when it rains, and it can bring the salts down. So we want those to go down into the profile. They're geological salts. They've been there forever. They're going to be there forever. They're not going away. Okay, we used to be underwater. That whole area was underwater at one time geologically. So we're going to have some of those type things. So when we start to transpire out the water, we have the water release. We're using water then. We have the water release, and we're buying something because it's a green plant. The green plant's going to put the exudates into the soil as a carbon release sugar. Now we bring our carbon levels up, our biology levels up, we build soil aggregates. We're buying something. So that's transpiration. Comes out of the stomata. So when the sunlight is out during the day, what comes into that stomata that's open during the daylight hours? What comes in? Be CO2, right? Carbon dioxide will come in, and that stomata is open, so the water vapor will come out, transpiring water. So the water vapor will come out along with what? Along with oxygen, right? The opposite of us. Yeah, we're going to give off CO2. We're going to take in oxygen. I don't know who thought the system up with people and plants. I don't know, but it's almost like it was thought out. So you look at that. it's a different book. So you look at that whole scenario, and we have to get our heads wrapped around if we're going to survive this salinity thing. And it's gotten real serious in the Dakotas and on into Canada. If we're going to survive this thing, we have to learn to transpire out our water. It's essential. And we got to stop evaporating out our water through tillage and bare soils. Okay? Makes sense? Yeah. Yes?
Where do you do your food web test at? Or is that a Haney test? Or?
I do the PLFA through Ward Labs. So I do a PLFA for the biology, and then I do a standard soil test because I still like to take a look at things like salinity on there, but also base saturation. So I still like to look at base saturation, and that's what's on the standard. Standard's good data. You know, that's not a problem. It's just that there's more data now. And then I do a Haney analysis for the organic and the Solvita, basically. Yeah. Yeah. So I usually take 3 in my little world. and then multiple years, and start to paint a picture. Yeah. Soil monitoring just takes time, and you got to have years. You got to have years to establish a trend line. Yeah. Yes, Derek.
You had mentioned taking out fence lines or progression we've seen. So if you were to put in pollinator strips, maybe going back to next time, do you have any recommendations, just art or size, in order to be effective?
Well, the question is, if we put in and started build back like on a pollinator strip or any of that, I think the key to all of that is if we put the soil health principles in place, they need to be in a systems approach because they can't carry the load alone. And then if we bring in that pollinator or some type of buffer planting next to a riparian area or something like that, you're not relying entirely on that pollinator strip. Then it's a group effort. And I think that's the key to that. I like to put them, I like the idea of what you're doing in terms of impacting all the acres versus a part of the acres in a corner. Because we know from experience in the pollinator world, the little guys can't go all that far. The big guys can go a long ways. But if you're all sitting in one corner, you don't get the same impact as if you got plant diversity across the field. You know, you just don't. So hats off to what you're doing. I think you're on the right road. Yes, sir.
After you plant your cover crop behind the beans, and it doesn't get much growth in the winter, what is the plan into that for next spring?
Well, like the one, the first one that we talked about, he would put that in after the barley, or maybe after the barley and the pintos. And the starter kit for that then is to plant the soybeans in green. The soybeans like that environment. It's a good starter. At the Minokan farm, I also do canola. So I'll put the canola in green into a rye, then it's a broadleaf into a grass, just like the soybean is a broadleaf into the rye grass. I like the agronomics of that. I think when things improve in your soils, I think you got some latitude to probably expand that a bit. You know, you see a lot of people take corn, warm season grass, and put it into the rye, the cool season grass. And I think there's options for that, but the starter kit to me is the soybean. It's real tolerant of that. So yeah, we'll go ahead and put that in the fall. In North Dakota, sometimes I put the rye in November. And Derek, how big does my rye get in North Dakota in November? Probably doesn't even come up. Probably doesn't even germinate. But it'll come up in the spring. But it'll come up slower than something I planted a month earlier and did emerge. It'll just be slower. So we have to find what fits in our environment, and what fits in our environment is something that's a biennial that I can put in the fall to close that spring window up. When I do that, then I transfer, because that rye, in our environment, that rye is going to be, it isn't going to be like Lucas Griswold's from Pennsylvania. Did you get to hear him yet? Okay, his rye is going to be as tall as a tractor, right? Yeah. Mine's going to be 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet, okay? But it's harvesting sunlight and putting exudates into the soil. Then I put in my soybean. I'll let that grow a bit. I'm going to terminate it early if I'm dry. I'm going to terminate my rye early if I'm dry. Okay? And if I'm wet, I'm going to go a little longer. And then I hand off the baton on the exudates continually flowing into the soil. So I get them from the rye, and then I get them from the soybean. Make sense? Yeah. Because that's the complete opposite of how we used to farm. You know, what we did in North Dakota over the years is nothing. We killed everything in the fall, killed everything in the spring. We had a short little window where we had a green plant, and we didn't allow anything else to live. And we tilled intensively. Maximum release of nutrient. Then one day we had salinity and erosion that wouldn't quit. Other questions? Yes?
How tall is your canola when you plant into the rye green? How tall do you let your canola get before you terminate the rye?
Actually, we took the rye out, I think it was probably less than a week after we planted the canola. Something interesting happened on the canola. We had an area like the size of this aisle right here where we were doing some work on the machine. Nothing was seeded there. Okay? And then we started looking at the flea beetle damage. And the flea beetle damage in the bare, where it was bare, no cover crop, just canola, that was pretty intense. And then once we got into the cover crop, the dead litters, the dead cover crop standing there, we still had some damage from the flea beetle, but very little. So it was, so I get a hold of Jonathan Lundgren, you know, the entomologist, and I said, what's going on? Oh, he said, it's the compound eye. And he said, it's so exciting. It's the compound eye. They can't pick it out. And so what was happening with their compound eye, they could see the perfect rows of canola when there was no cover crop. They could just go right down the row. But when they got into the cover crop, they had more trouble. With compound eye, couldn't separate it. So that's a pretty good thing for canola, right? Yeah, I didn't know that was coming. I wasn't smart enough to figure that out. I just observed it later, you know. Yeah, it's a good question. Other questions? Who's planting green? How long? Year, 2, 5, 2 years, 3 years, 8 years? There's the guy. Very good. Yeah. I really think for us, it's going to make a huge difference on cover crop implementation, and I think it's going to make a huge difference in our resource concerns. Gives us a place to go and to put it in. Economically, if you put that cover in the fall, like the rye cover crop in the fall, I've never yet ever lost it. You know, I've never lost it. Like sometimes you plant annuals in the fall and they don't evolve the way you wanted them to, or it was kind of dry. If it's like that in the fall, I'm still going to get it in the spring. That's what I really liked. My bang for my buck was bigger. And it was more sure. It was more sure. So, yeah.
Getting that far north, are you planting corn green also? Or?
Yeah, I planted corn green into camelina, broadleaf. Yep. That way I could put a grass into a broadleaf. And I'm not saying I can't do it with the rye. I'm just kind of testing the water. And then I'll probably put some rye with the camelina.
Is that a winter annual?
That's a biennial. That's a biennial, yeah. It's a 2-year plant, just like rye is.
Or, okay.
Yeah.
Plant in fall.
I got the seed from the University of Minnesota, planted in the fall. Okay. Yep, they sent me 2 bags of seed, but I had to agree to quit emailing them.
Is it a legume or a?
No, it's an oil.
Okay.
I think it's an oil.
So it's like canola or something.
Yeah, well, it's on that order. It's a broadleaf, oblong leaf. Has a flat rosette in the spring. Yeah.
More like flags.
Say again?
It's kind of like flags, plant architecture.
Yeah, a little bit. It looks like something you should spray and kill dead. Yeah.
Did you plant it late like the rye?
I did. I planted it in November. It came up slow and angry, but it came up. Yeah.
How much growth did you get on it in the spring?
I had, I probably, when we went in with the corn, I probably didn't have more than 2-3 inches. Just enough to stabilize the surface. Then I had another field, I put some rye with it, and the two together, both in November. You know, because I'm going to do this in worst case scenario, because that's what the Minokan farm is.
So my November's different than yours.
Yeah, yeah, just think real late. Yeah, we had snow then. Yep.
Can you put flax in the same place, like, or plant flax into standing rye like you're doing with canola?
Flax into standing rye. Derek, have you done that? Flax into standing rye?
I haven't, James. I've struggled with planting green in the spring because we're so dry being that much.
Yeah. You're more brittle than we are.
Yeah, so we've struggled with it. But we've done a little bit of planting green with clover instead. After taking water more down by the fibers.
Yeah.
A little bit better luck with that. I want to do it so bad.
Yeah. We got works in your environment, and you know, we're a 16-inch precip zone. You're probably 14, somewhere's in there. Yeah, yeah. Find your way. I mean, you got to find your way. Any other comments, questions, shared experiences? Okay.
Do you still suggest cocktails as much as you still plan a lot of cocktails?
Yes.
Zero
Yes, when I get a window and I can bring in diversity, I load it up. Yep. I've never moved away from it. What I like about it is every plant has a different exudate. So it's not just that they have one, they have a different one. Because what are the three ways we're getting carbon? We're getting a third from the grain. That usually has wheels under it. There's a third on the above ground residue. Most of that's going to oxidize to the atmosphere when it lays on the surface. It's just armor, right? You're not going to get much carbon from it, a little. There's a third of the carbon in the root mass. And then did you catch that, what Ann said? How much was coming from an exudate? How much of that total was still coming as an exudate? This is the fourth way now, okay? I think she said something like, was it 40? 30 or 40? 40? Okay, I've looked up all kinds of data on that for my talk at this AIM thing coming up in a couple days. And I found this 30-40% figure a few times. So I think she's real close on that. Because I found 3 sources and they all listed something pretty similar to that. Okay, so everybody understands that's the direct feed. That's the direct one. That's going right to the soil. That's your big one. That's the impact. That's why you want to plant green if you can, because of that reason, when you boil it all down. Okay? And then if I can bring in the multi-species, and I have some grazing years I do that on, I kind of like anything from 8 to 12. That's kind of me, but I'm happy with any of them. But I mean, if I get my choice, or if I get my way.
The reason I asked that, a lot of people talk about planting the soil rye.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't.
But if I'm late in the year, I'm just going to put the rye in. If I'm late in the year. Yep. I do what I got to do to make it work. Yeah, I'm not a purist. Maybe should be, but. Well, appreciate your time. Happy to have gone through those 2 different case studies with you. And just talk through one with livestock, one without livestock. Talk a little bit through planting green, because I think there's a bit of a planting green emphasis on this 2 days because of some of the other speakers that are here. And I really kind of wanted to give it a, here's why I think in our neck of the woods we need to be looking at doing it seriously, because of the things that it can put on the table for us and the resource concerns that it can address. And then from the livestock viewpoint, that's the greatest recycler we have. Love them all. You know, at the Minokan farm, I use chickens, goats, sheep, and yearlings. And so I run a large scale with the sheep and yearlings together, and a small landowner scale with the goats and chickens together. So everything through a stomach that I can with covers. That's how I'll go in and I'll harvest 50% by weight on the covers. So. Abby, we're going back to you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay, for your entertainment and sharing your knowledge with us today.